In 2006, when I was 56, I found myself in the examination room of a neurologist. I had noticed that my right hand wasn't swinging when I walked, and my handwriting was getting smaller and smaller, so I decided to have these things checked out. I was first seen by the assistant to the neurologist. He briefly examined me and then left the room, saying that the doctor would be with me shortly. After waiting for over an hour, the neurologist swept into the room, bent my arms back and forth a few times, and then asked in a rather superior manner, "Do you know what you have?" "No," I exclaimed, "that's why I'm here." "You have Parkinson's disease. You won't die of Parkinson's. The Pope didn't die of Parkinson's." This was a reference to Pope John Paul II, who had been seen suffering from the disease prior to his death. I felt myself spinning out into space as shock hit me. I was utterly confused. Why were we talking about the Pope? I wasn't even Catholic. I barely managed to squeak out, "What is Parkinson's?" "I can't tell you," the neurologist pronounced. "Everyone is different." And just then the neurologist was called out of the room. The assistant tried to help. "It's like this," he said. Then he stood up, hunched over, and shuffled around the room. I was horrified. "You mean this is going to become of me?" As soon as I could, I rushed back to the college where I worked. I ran around the halls, shouting to everyone, "I have Parkinson's disease, and I don't even know what it is." The next day, my boss, who's somewhere in the audience here, brought me a book entitled "Your First Year with Parkinson's." Now I felt even more anxious. "You mean it'd take a whole book just to explain the first year?" Needless to say, I needed a new neurologist, and I got one, but only after a run-in with neurologist number 1. I needed her examination notes, but I was repeatedly told they weren't ready. So I went to her office, and just when the receptionist found a copy, the doctor emerged from her office. Seeing me, she shouted angrily, "You have been harassing my staff about the report, and I won't stand for it. Get out of my office and never set foot in here again." I grabbed the report from the receptionist and ran. Now completely traumatized, my journey with Parkinson's began. At the outset, I was science librarian at Earlham College. There were 2 main elements to my job: acquiring scientific information and helping students and faculty. But the best part of my job was periodically taking students to Kenya for a semester-long program abroad. The program had the same elements as my work in the library. I was experiencing new things and helping people, but Kenya was way more exciting. There were lions and leopards and hippos, after all. In my personal life, I had a supportive family and good friends. I pursued my favorite activities: crafts, cooking, entertaining people, and international travel. All in all, I felt truly fortunate in life. At the time of my diagnosis, I had only a few mild symptoms and was not on any medication. I felt confident that I could lead the Kenya program as scheduled, and so I did. The program was a big success. I took 20 students over, and I brought them all back alive. 3 years later, now on medication but still doing well, I led the program again, this time with my husband as my co-leader. Only this time, it was a disaster. Early in the program, I began to feel sort of loopy in the afternoons, and I found it difficult to speak coherently. These symptoms worsened, and more things went wrong. I ended up in a rural hospital while my neurologist at home tried valiantly to adjust my medications from afar. But it didn't work. I had to go home. I stayed with friends for the next 3 months trying to recover. My husband spent those same 3 months still in Kenya with his 20 students, running the program by himself. I don't know which of us had it harder. At that time, I was still grappling with the idea of having an incurable disease. I had an uneasy feeling that people now saw Parkinson's as a factor that defined me. Even little things could make me feel this way. When dancing at a wedding party, my dance partner said, "Gee, I've never danced with someone who had Parkinson's before." I got kicked out of a square dancing class because the teacher said I was too slow in learning the steps. But there was another guy there who was way worse than I was, and he didn't get kicked out. I felt that I needed some model for living with an incurable illness, a metaphor that could show a way out of anxiety and self-doubt, a picture of acceptance. Then I had an inspiration. Parkinson's disease is like the Wizard of Oz. In this story, Dorothy was swept out of Kansas by a tornado and dropped into a foreign land. There she encountered a tin man, a scarecrow, a cowardly lion. Each was seeking something. What Dorothy wanted was to get back home to Kansas. Glinda the Good Witch told Dorothy it was within her power to return. All Dorothy needed to do was click the heels of her ruby slippers 3 times and say, "There's no place like home, there's no place like home." I felt like Dorothy, ripped away by a tornado and swept off to a strange land where I was no longer Sarah. I was Sara who has Parkinson's disease. I didn't like this. I wanted to get back to being just me. But I didn't sense that I had any inner power to do so. So I began learning all about the disease, starting with symptoms. I discovered that I needed a new vocabulary of technical terms, such as bradykinesia, dystonia, anosmia, and so forth. Some Parkinson's terms, however, are in plain English. The loss of executive function. I find this name amusing. It makes me think of a little desk in my head emanating directions on what to do and how to do it. But by far, the scariest terms are in plain English, the words that define the disease as a whole: chronic, incurable, progressive, neurodegenerative. It is hard to imagine a combination of words that sound worse than that. An interesting characteristic of Parkinson's symptoms is that few of them can be measured by objective means. You can't run a laboratory test and end up with a numerical score like you would if you were testing blood glucose levels in a diabetic. Instead, for many Parkinson's symptoms, the doctor observes the patient and makes a subjective judgment. Everyone here is familiar with this type of assessment because it is used in the basic Parkinson's exam to check gait and balance. You know how it goes. You are asked to touch your nose with your finger, walk with even steps, and remain standing when your neurologist pulls you backwards by the shoulders. I like to refer to this as the Parkinson's police sobriety check. Of course, key observations are those of the person with the disease. This may be the only evidence to go on if there's no objective test and if the features are not observable by the neurologist. Thus, the patient needs to take an active role in their diagnosis and treatment. This is not the doctor knows best model that I grew up with. Doctors then were assumed to be the expert on everything and every aspect of the disease and treatment. Now it's more like a partnership for delving into a disease that has many unknowns. Making the task even harder is the fact that each person's experience is unlike anyone else's. These challenges can be very frustrating, but matters are not always grim, and I learned from experience that some diagnoses and treatments work easily and well. I developed orthostatic hypotension, a condition in which a sudden drop in blood pressure occurs when changed from a prone or sitting position to standing. It can result in fainting. On an airplane flight with me, concerned passengers gasped when I stood up and fainted in the aisle. They rushed to help me as I fainted again in the jetway, getting off the plane. With this symptom, you get a lot of attention. For me, the cure was to take salt tablets to increase my blood pressure. Over the course of a few months, I stopped taking the pills, my blood pressure normalized, and I've been fine on that score ever since. In fact, I was fortunate. The condition can be much more difficult to resolve. Bolstered by learning about Parkinson's, I turned my attention to regaining more of the ground I lost during the Kenya crisis. My approach was basically to try multiple treatments. My neurologist and I experimented with different medicines. With my psychiatrist, who is trained in traditional Chinese medicine, I learned to recognize internal pressures weighing me down and interfering with normal functioning. I started participating in exercise activities. This was a challenge for me because I hadn't been following any sort of exercise routine. I sought out a personal trainer. I took advantage of Parkinson-specific exercise programs like Dance with Parkinson's and Rock Steady Boxing. All around me were people who got me going and kept me going. I also joined a support group and learned more about and saw how others dealt with Parkinson's. I probably learned more from these friends than from medical professionals involved in my care. I had qualms when I woke up this morning about whether or not I should say that. But when you consider the fact that you only have 1 or 2 appointments with your neurologist a year, and each is probably less than an hour long, that's not very much time. Whereas you can attend Parkinson's meetings monthly, and many of the people present have had years of personal experience and have substantial knowledge. At some point, I began to do things that helped others. I joined the Parkinson's Support and Wellness Organization in Cincinnati and began working with its dedicated staff and volunteers to develop educational programs. I write for its blog and help with fundraising. A source of major satisfaction for me has been my involvement in bringing Parkinson programs to Oxford, Ohio, where I live, an area lacking in Parkinson's services. I helped start and maintain a support group. I was instrumental in bringing people from Reed Hospital in Richmond, Indiana, together with people from Miami University and Oxford, Ohio. This resulted in the creation of a jointly supported Rock Steady boxing program located in Oxford, which has been very well received. Throughout my time with Parkinson's, now 17 years, my condition has remained reasonably steady with only a slow accumulation of new symptoms and only a gradual decline in my overall condition. I can pretty much do what I used to do before my diagnosis, just not as well and much more slowly. This can be very frustrating. Sometimes I don't know if I'm going to scream or cry. But I try to remain upbeat, like one of my friends who describes her Parkinson's changes not as problems, but as solutions. For example, instead of saying she has difficulty turning over in bed, my friend talks about changing her cotton sheets to silky, satiny ones. Doesn't sound too bad that way. Fortunately, I can still do all the major activities that have been of importance to me. I have kept traveling, back to Kenya several times, and to countries in Europe, South America, and the Middle East. And I continue to enjoy being with family and friends. Alan, my husband, a can-do guy, has been the perfect partner for me in the face of a can't-do disease. My old friends have helped me feel rooted by treating me as the Sara I was before the diagnosis. New friends from the Parkinson's community have shown me how they navigate their personal journey with Parkinson's. Nonetheless, it's been difficult to shake the feeling that I've become Sara with Parkinson's. And I wonder why I spend so much time on Parkinson's activities. Wouldn't I feel happier if I just forgot about it? But how can I forget with lingering symptoms and pills to take? Then it dawned on me. I am drawn to Parkinson's resources and activities because this makes it possible for me to remain the Sara I was. Like before, I am still learning new things, and like before, I am still engaged in helping people. The one major change is the venue. What I used to do in an academic setting, I now do in the arena of Parkinson's disease. As I approach the end of my remarks now, I want to return to the metaphor of the Wizard of Oz. In the end of the story, the Tin Man acquires a heart, the Scarecrow finds a brain, and the Cowardly Lion finally shows courage, and Dorothy makes her way home to Kansas. I too have friends at my side. One has shown her intellect by writing a book about hiking with Parkinson's. Another friend, along with her husband, shows her heart by continuing to entertain friends even as the effort to do so increases. And right now, I see lots of courageous people. Each of us in this room is showing courage by facing Parkinson's disease together. As for clicking my heels, I don't have ruby slippers, but I can recite, "I'm still just Sara, I'm still just Sara," to remind me of who I am. Oh, one final thing. I really think Dorothy should have had someone along to provide a sense of humor. I have a friend who does this for me. She and I write limericks to make fun of the problems we face. And I'd like to share 2 of these with you. First, what the hell is executive function? Does it need a good nerve-to-nerve junction? If so, I am screwed. My brain is unglued. I'm lacking transmitter production. Finally, I would like you to provide the last word for the concluding limerick. You can say it aloud, preferably, or you can read it silently to yourself. A chronic disease that's first class, because its symptoms are broad and they're vast. Though they start in your head, as your nerve cells go dead, it feels like a pain in the... Thank you.